Adana was the kind of woman every girl in the village admired. She carried herself with grace, her laughter soft like morning rain, and her presence so warm that people often said she could light up even the gloomiest gathering. She was married to Chukwudi, a man who charmed everyone with his bright smile and confident stride. Together, they seemed to be the perfect couple, the example others pointed to when speaking of love and marriage. Whenever they walked through the marketplace side by side, the villagers would whisper, "Truly, God bless them." Mothers prayed their daughters would find a husband like Chukwudi, and young men envied the respect he commanded. From the outside, theirs was a picture of happiness, the kind that could never crack. But inside their home, away from the eyes of the village, things were far from perfect. The laughter was fading. The conversations were shallow. Adana, though gentle, felt the cold distance in her husband's eyes. She noticed how his smile reached others, but rarely reached her anymore. Sometimes at night, when the house was silent and their children asleep, she would sit awake, wondering when their love had changed, wondering why her heart felt so heavy, though the world saw only beauty in their union. Chukwudi had grown restless. His pride had begun to tower over his affection, and instead of cherishing his wife, he treated her quiet patience as weakness. He offered her fewer words, fewer glances, fewer moments of closeness. Adana, strong in spirit, held her silence, but deep within, she carried questions that refused to rest. One evening, the truth of her fears came alive. The moon glowed softly over the village, children played in the dusty courtyards, and women cooked outside their huts. Inside her home, Adana set the evening meal on the table, waiting for her husband to return. But as the night stretched longer, she saw him slip quietly out, his steps quick, his eyes avoiding hers. He vanished into the darkness, leaving her alone with the silence. The weight of his absence filled the room like a storm cloud, pressing against her chest, whispering suspicions she could no longer ignore. The village market was always alive with chatter, women bargaining for yams, men discussing the price of palm wine, children running between stalls. But that week, a different kind of talk filled the air. Sharp, hushed whispers that followed Adana wherever she went. Some said Chukwudi had been seen in the nearby town, his arm brushing against a woman's as they laughed together. Others swore they had spotted him buying trinkets and jewelry, not for his wife, but for Ngozi, a woman known for her beauty and boldness. Adana heard the whispers like the rustling of dry leaves, soft yet unrelenting. Every time she walked past a group of women pounding cassava, their conversations would falter, their eyes sliding toward her with pity before quickly turning away. Men shook their heads in silence, muttering, "How could Chukwudi shame his wife so openly?" The news spread like wildfire, sparking endless gossip under the mango trees, by the stream, and around the cooking fires. But Adana never let her face betray the storm inside her. She continued her daily tasks with quiet dignity, her steps steady, her voice calm. She fetched water, greeted her neighbors, and smiled at her children, as though she had not heard a single word. Yet when she returned home, and the door closed behind her, her chest tightened. She would sit in silence, staring at the wooden box where she kept her letters, pressing her palms against it, as if to draw strength from the secrets she poured onto the pages. Though her heart bled with every rumor, she refused to let the village see her break. She knew that her silence was not surrender, but strength. She chose dignity over drama, swallowing her pain, while the whispers grew louder around her. The world thought she was blind, but Adana was watching, waiting, and listening, every word cutting deeper, every rumor shaping the storm she quietly carried within. The drums of the festival echoed across the village, their rhythm pulling everyone into the open square. Bright fabrics swayed, dancers moved with joy, and children laughed as they chased one another between stalls. It was a night meant for celebration, a night where the community gathered as one. Adana arrived gracefully, her wrapper neatly tied, her smile calm though her heart carried the weight of silent storms. Villagers greeted her warmly as always, for she was a woman respected for her dignity. But soon, whispers began to rise. Heads turned, and eyes shifted toward the edge of the gathering. There stood Chukwudi, her husband, laughing loudly with Ngozi by his side. His hand lingered too long on her arm. His eyes glistened with a shameless delight, and he made no attempt to hide it. The sight spread through the crowd like fire in dry grass. Women covered their mouths, men shook their heads, and children looked on with wide, questioning eyes. The perfect couple was unraveling in front of them. Adana stood still, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames of the bonfire. Though every whisper pierced her like a knife, she refused to flinch. The villagers studied her, expecting tears, rage, or an outburst. But her silence was a shield, her calmness a quiet strength that unsettled even those who pitied her. Chukwudi noticed her standing alone. Instead of shame, he swelled with pride, walking closer, dragging Ngozi with him. In front of the gathering, he raised his voice so all could hear. "Look at her," he said mockingly, pointing to Adana. "She keeps silent because she knows I am a man of power. I can do as I please, and no one dares question me." The crowd murmured in disbelief, some gasping, others turning away in shame for him. Adana's lips tightened, but she spoke no word. She simply lifted her chin, her eyes calm yet burning with quiet fire. And though Chukwudi laughed loudly, deep within the crowd, everyone could see where the true strength stood, silent, unshaken, and waiting. The festival ended, and the laughter of the village faded into the night. But in Adana's home, silence ruled. She moved through the rooms like a shadow, her smile gone, her spirit weighed down. When the children slept, she sat alone by the small lantern's glow, her tears falling quietly onto her wrapper. She pressed her palm against her chest, trying to steady the ache inside, but the pain only grew heavier with every memory of Chukwudi's betrayal. On the small wooden table before her lay sheets of paper. Slowly, with trembling hands, she began to write. Her words carried sorrow, but also strength. She wrote of her wounds, of her silence, of the strength she still held though the world thought her broken. Each letter became a piece of her heart, sealed carefully and locked away in a carved wooden box her father had once given her. It became her secret refuge, a place where she poured her truth while her lips spoke none. The children, still young yet wise enough to sense their mother's pain, watched her closely. They saw her smile for them in the day, hiding the storm in her chest. They saw her kneel in prayer at dawn, whispering for strength they could not yet understand. Though they did not see her tears, they felt them, like rain hidden in the soil. And in their innocent hearts, they admired her courage. She was their shelter, even when she was hurting. In the village, whispers grew again. Women noticed how Adana moved with quiet determination. Some said, "She is planning something." Others nodded knowingly, for they could see in her eyes that her silence was no surrender. They gathered near the stream, pounding yam and murmuring, "Adana is stronger than we thought. She carries pain, but she carries it like a queen." Alone at night, Adana closed the box, wiped her tears, and straightened her back. Though her heart bled, her spirit was sharpening like a blade hidden in velvet. What the world saw as sorrow was only the beginning of something far greater. Chukwudi no longer cared to hide his betrayal. Nights passed with his mat untouched, his children asking where their father was, and Adana giving soft answers to shield their tender hearts. He returned home only when it pleased him, his clothes smelling of palm wine, his laughter loud, his steps heavy. The duties he once carried with pride, providing for his household, guiding his children, standing as a pillar in the community, he abandoned without shame. The farm went untended. The household expenses fell on Adana, and yet Chukwudi walked the village streets as though he were a king. The villagers noticed his recklessness. Elders frowned when he strolled past them without greeting, his arrogance thick like dust. Women whispered, "How can he treat Adana so?" But Chukwudi, blinded by pride, believed himself untouchable. With Ngozi at his side, he fed on her flattery, convinced that his wife's silence meant defeat. One evening, Adana gathered the courage to confront him. She stood in their hut, her voice calm but steady. "Chukwudi," she said, "you are neglecting your home, your children, your name. This path you walk will bring only shame." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, as if her words might pierce his heart. But then he threw back his head and laughed. His laughter was sharp, mocking, and it cut deeper than a knife. He stepped closer, his eyes full of scorn, and declared, "You are nothing without me. Do you hear? Nothing. Without my name, without my presence. Who would you be? A woman cannot stand without her husband." Remember that Adana's lips pressed into silence, her eyes steady, though her chest burned with pain. She turned away, refusing to let him see the tears forming. His arrogance filled the room like smoke, choking every trace of love that once lived there. And yet, though he believed her silence proved his power, Adana knew it was the silence of a storm gathering strength, one that would one day sweep his arrogance into the dust. The night was quiet, the moon casting a soft silver glow over the village. Most homes were silent, the fires dimming as families slept. But Adana did not sleep. Her heart was heavy, her mind clear. She rose from her mat, tied her wrapper tightly, and carried a bundle close to her chest. With steady steps, she walked through the sandy paths toward the chief's compound, her shadow stretching long under the moonlight. The elders were gathered inside a small hut, speaking in low tones when Adana entered. They looked up, surprised to see her at such an hour. She greeted them with respect, her voice calm but firm, then placed the sealed documents before them. "I have remained silent too long," she said, her eyes unwavering. "Tonight, I bring you the truth." The eldest among them, his beard white and his hands trembling, slowly opened the first document. The others leaned closer, their eyes narrowing as they read. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the soft rustle of papers. One elder gasped quietly, another placed his hand on his chest, and the chief himself sat back, his face frozen in shock. Adana stood tall, her hands folded in front of her, watching them absorb the truth she had hidden for years. She did not raise her voice or beg for sympathy. She spoke with quiet authority, her words measured but strong. These lands, these rights, this inheritance were placed under my name. I chose silence so that peace might remain in my home. But now, I can no longer let silence be mistaken for weakness. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions grave. They understood the weight of what had been revealed. For years, they had believed Chukwudi was the pillar of the household, but now they saw that the foundation had always been Adana. The chief cleared his throat and nodded slowly. "This must be known," he said firmly. By the time Adana left the hut, the air was charged with destiny. The elders had made their decision. The village would soon hear the truth, and the storm Adana had carried in silence was ready to break. The chief's summons spread quickly through the village, carried from mouth to mouth until every ear had heard. By morning, the square was alive with murmurs and movement. Men gathered under the shade of the great Iroko tree. Women sat on wooden stools with babies tied to their backs, and children pressed close, curious about what was to unfold. The air was tense, as though everyone sensed that something greater than gossip was about to be revealed. Chukwudi arrived with the swagger of a man who feared nothing. Dressed in his finest attire, beads around his neck, he walked with his chest high, his hand resting proudly on Ngozi's arm. She wore bright colors and a smile too wide, enjoying the attention of being beside the man everyone once praised. Together they moved through the crowd, their laughter loud, their confidence overflowing. To them, this gathering was nothing more than another chance to flaunt their union before the eyes of the village. Then Adana appeared. She stepped into the square with quiet grace, her wrapper simple yet elegant, her headscarf tied neatly. The chatter fell to a hush. Though her face was calm, her eyes burned with unshaken dignity, the kind that silenced mockery without a word. She did not walk quickly, nor did she lower her gaze. Each step was steady, as though the earth itself respected her presence. The villagers shifted, watching the contrast. On one side stood Chukwudi and Ngozi, glowing with arrogance. On the other stood Adana, her strength unspoken but undeniable. Some whispered, "Today will not be ordinary." Others nodded, sensing the storm that had been building quietly in her silence. Chukwudi smirked when he saw her, leaning close to Ngozi. "She dares to stand before me?" he said loudly, enough for those nearby to hear. But Adana did not flinch. She took her place at the front of the gathering, her chin raised, her eyes fixed on the elders. The square grew still, the drums silent, the wind heavy. The stage was set for truth to finally break free. The chief rose slowly from his carved wooden stool, his staff striking the earth to call for silence. The villagers leaned forward, their eyes wide with curiosity, their whispers swallowed by the heavy air. Adana stood tall, her face calm, while Chukwudi grinned with arrogance, certain that nothing could touch his pride. Ngozi clung to his arm, flashing a smug smile, as if the day already belonged to them. The eldest among the council unrolled a bundle of documents, their edges worn with age, but their words sharp with truth. His voice carried with authority as he began to speak. "Today, the people shall know what has been hidden in plain sight. Adana, daughter of the late Obioma, is the rightful heir to his vast lands, his farms, his wealth. Everything her father built, every seed he planted, was entrusted in her name." Gasps broke through the crowd like a sudden storm. Mothers pressed their hands against their mouths, men exchanged stunned glances, and even children sensed the weight of the moment. The elder continued. For years, she allowed her husband to walk with respect, to wear the cloak of honor, never revealing that the true power, the true wealth, rested with her. She carried her inheritance in silence, not out of weakness, but out of humility. Chukwudi's proud smile froze, his grip on Ngozi's hand loosening. Murmurs spread. So it was her all along. Adana is the true owner. Ngozi's eyes darted nervously, the sparkle of arrogance draining from her face. The villagers, who once whispered about Adana's sorrow, now looked at her with awe, their respect blooming like fire in dry grass. The chief's voice thundered once more. "Let it be known this day that the dignity of a woman is not in the shadow of her husband, but in the truth she carries." All eyes turned to Chukwudi, his face pale, his arrogance crumbling. The same villagers who once mocked Adana now leaned forward, waiting to see what his pride would do in the face of revelation. The words of the elders still echoed in the air when Chukwudi's knees gave way beneath him. His proud chest, that once rose high, now collapsed inward, and the man who had strutted like a king sank into the dust of the village square. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape, but there was none. The truth had stripped him bare. The woman he mocked, the wife he betrayed, the one he claimed was nothing without him, now stood revealed as wealthier and more powerful than he could ever dream. The villagers who once pitied Adana now shifted toward her, their faces filled with admiration. Women nodded with pride, whispering, "She is stronger than we knew." Men bowed their heads respectfully, realizing how blind they had been to her quiet strength. Even the children, who had seen their mother endure in silence, looked on with wide eyes, their hearts swelling with pride. The balance of honor had shifted, and it was Adana who now stood above them all. Chukwudi reached for Ngozi's hand, desperate for comfort, but her fingers slipped away. The boldness she once wore vanished like smoke in the wind. She glanced around, realizing the eyes of the crowd no longer admired her, but burned with judgment. Without a word, she pulled her wrapper tighter and stepped back, then turned and slipped silently through the crowd. The villagers did not stop her, for she was already forgotten, a shadow fading into the distance. Alone, Chukwudi raised his eyes to Adana, his lips trembling as if to speak, but no words came. His arrogance had shattered into shame, his pride scattered like dry leaves in the Harmattan wind. He tried to stand, but his legs shook, and the weight of humiliation pressed him down. The same villagers who once laughed at Adana now rose to honor her, their cheers and praises filling the square. And in that moment, Chukwudi realized his greatest loss was not wealth or respect, but the woman whose dignity had endured when his pride had failed. The village square was still buzzing with shock when Adana stepped forward, her head held high, her voice steady. She looked around at the faces that had once pitied her, the same faces that now shone with respect. She did not raise her voice, yet every ear leaned close, eager to hear her words. "I did not remain silent because I was weak," she began, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "I remained silent because I knew that respect and loyalty matter more than riches. A man who has wealth but no honor is poorer than the beggar on the street." The villagers murmured in agreement, their hearts stirred by the truth of her words. She continued, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "What I have inherited is not just for me. It is not for pride, and it is not for arrogance. It is for this village, for the women who work tirelessly but are silenced, for the children whose futures must shine brighter than ours. With my father's wealth, schools will be built, farms will be supported, and the voices of women will no longer be ignored." The crowd erupted in cheers, their admiration overflowing. Women lifted their babies higher, blessing Adana's name. Men nodded, their pride humbled by the courage of a woman who had endured betrayal, yet still chose to give back to her people. The chief himself rose from his stool, striking his staff into the ground. "From this day, Adana shall be remembered not only as Obioma's daughter, but as the mother of dignity for our people." Chukwudi remained crouched in shame, his head bowed, his pride shattered. The lesson had come full circle, and the crowd no longer looked at him, but only at the woman who had turned silence into strength. Adana lifted her chin, her final words ringing clear across the square. "A woman's silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is the storm before revelation." And with those words, she sealed her place in the hearts of her people forever.